Good day, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are from. Welcome to World Power Volley Presents webinar. In this episode, it's the Down But Not Out, the Inside Edge on Mental Health. I would like to introduce you the President of World Power Volley, Barry Kusner. Thank you.
Thank you, Kwok. Greetings to everybody joining this historical webinar. It's fantastic for us to have this very first one and some other topics to follow in the future. In thinking about this, I had some key words, I guess, to consider about mental health. And some of the things that came to my mind were words like strength and self-awareness and the processing of information, resilience and persistence, and mental capacity. And I was also thinking about some of the tools that perhaps people use that perhaps help them to address issues around mental health, including tools like Vent and Let Go. I also had a look at a really significant website that deals with issues around mental health, and they had a series of links on their main page that each link provided certain information about mental health. And the groups that they had this information on included women and men and older adults and parents and First Nations, Indigenous people and people of multicultural heritage. But guess what? There was no link to mental health for people with any kind of disability. And yet, as we know, there's something in terms of 15% of the world's population have a disability of some sort. So I think that was a rather sad thing to find, but perhaps it does point out something about the issue of mental health and people with disabilities around the world. I'd like to thank Louise Ashcroft, who's our medical director, and Phil Allen, our general manager, and Dr. Kwok Leung, who's our history committee coordinator, for their work in putting this together, as well as their members of the webinar committee. I'd particularly like to thank Greg Stewart and Elvira Stinnison, both of whom I remember seeing play sitting volleyball in 2006 in the Netherlands, actually. And Elvira was, of course, later to play 12 years later in the Netherlands in another sitting volleyball world championships, also in the Netherlands, but across 5 different cities. Greg, of course, went on to do something quite special in Tokyo. And I think it was something called a gold medal that he won in Tokyo in a different sport. So we have 2 fantastic athletes here for this event. And also I'd like to thank Dr. Deborah Alexander, because she's given us her time for us to enable us to take advantage of her expertise in this area. Deborah is not only a IPC board member, but also heavily involved and has been for many years in the sport of triathlon. So thank you to all of those people. I hope you enjoy the webinar, and I'll hand back to Kwok.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you for the opening words to this first World Power Volley Presents webinar. It gives me great pleasure to talk to you and to moderate this session. But before we go on straight to the presenters, I'd just like to give some housekeeping bits of information. First of all, this is Zoom webinars. So if you're familiar with Zoom, there are 2 types. This type is a webinar, which means that we can use the chat for writing questions and for chatting to everyone. And later on, when we have questions and answers at the end of each presenter and their presentation, and at the panel session, we can also ask people to put in questions, whether they're written, or if you'd like to speak and ask the question verbally, you can use the icon that you can see at the bottom of your Zoom bar, which will give you a little hand, and that will indicate that you've raised your hand and you would like to speak. This webinar is recorded, and that's about it, really. So without further ado, I'd really like to get us started with this session where we have three wonderful speakers. And the first one is Dr. Deborah Alexander. It gives me great pleasure to introduce her to this as she's a governing board member of the International Paralympic Committee and the African Paralympic Committee. She is the first Vice President of World Triathlon, the first Vice President of Africa Triathlon, and the second Vice President of the SASCOC, the South African National Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She is a board member of the Triathlon South Africa and past president. Debbie has led the team that provided the first draft of the South African NOC MPC Safeguarding Policy and Procedures. She contributed to the World Triathlon Safeguarding Policy and leads the IPC Safeguarding Policy Working. Amongst others, she has mentored Olympic and Paralympic athletes and coaches, women leaders in para sports on the African continent, and Sport Integrity Global Alliance mentees. She has presented internationally on athletes' mental health, wellness, and safeguarding on numerous occasions. Debbie is a neuropsychology, she has a PhD in neuropsychology in sport and is a clinical psychologist in private practice, having retired as head of the clinical psychology department of Teutoburg Hospital and the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences at Stellenbosch University. She remains as an extraordinary senior lecturer in the Psychiatry Department, Medical and Health Sciences faculty, where she is also the program director of the degree and master's mindfulness, MPhil master mindfulness degree. Without further ado, we see Deborah is online, so I'd like to hand it over to you now. Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you, Kwok. Thank you for the introduction. Friends in World Paravolley, World Parasport and the Paralympic movement, good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining this webinar today. It's a huge honor for me to have the opportunity to speak with you about something that I'm really passionate about and that's very close to my heart, and that's mental health and sport. And it's an even greater honor to share this platform with such celebrated and accomplished individuals as Greg Stewart and Elvira Stinnison. So thank you, Barry, Phil, Louise, Kwok, for this wonderful invitation. I was asked to speak with you about mental health and performance. And before I do, I want to invite you to be fully present in our time together today. So if you can switch off your phones, minimize your distractions, and really let's just enjoy the journey together. So I'm going to share my presentation with you. You can see the presentation, Kwok? I'm gathering you can see.
Yes, we can. We can.
Okay, super, thank you. So I'm just going to dive straight in. This is the agenda. So I'm going to do a preamble. In that preamble, I really want to touch on the title of the webinar. I'm going to talk a little bit about mental health, performance, psychology, and you'll see that I've got the athlete in inverted commas, and then the person, stress and stressors, mindfulness interventions. And I'm going to give you a little taste of mindfulness, which would mean you're going to have to participate with me. And then I'll just touch on research. I don't think I'm going to have the time for that, but what I have done is I've included in this presentation, so you're welcome to have a copy of it, and all the links are there to for you to go and peruse the research. So without further ado, the title of today's webinar is Down But Not Out. So I just want you to pause for a moment on these four words, down but not out. And what comes to your mind immediately? So I asked somebody who's not involved in Paravolley, I gave them these four words and I said, what pops up in your mind? And the first thing the person said was boxing, being knocked down, knocked out, but not knocked out, so you can get back up again. And when I looked at it, and it was down but not out, and then it was associated with mental health, I had a similar perspective, so that one does have the ability to get up again and fight another day. But in Paravali, I'm told by Kwak, it actually means that you want to get the ball down but not out. So really what I'm trying to illustrate here is that we all see the world through different lenses. And I think that's important to just keep in mind as we weave our way through this presentation today, is that we come to this from our own experiences, from the environments that we've grown up in, and it's not all the same. We don't see the world the same way. So in terms of mental health and performance, I'm going to just touch on mental health. So what does World Health Organization say about mental health? It's more than the absence of mental disorders. And they also say no health without mental health. And what does mental health mean? It's a state of complete physical, mental, social well-being. And I've added spiritual well-being as well. But I guess the emphasis is on well-being. So what do they say about well-being at the World Health Organization? So when we're able to realize our own abilities, we can cope with normal stresses, we can work productively, and we can contribute to the community. But there are other definitions of well-being and other ways of looking at well-being. It could mean a good quality of life, a state of being comfortable, happy, healthy, feeling positive, good, life satisfaction, happy, that we function well, we've got control of our own lives, and we have a sense of purpose and positive relationships. And in sport performance, that's the other side of the presentation, is when we think of sport performance, what do we think of? We think of skill, strength, endurance, recovery, and a blend of these dimensions. And of course, it's sport dependent. But there's another way of looking at sport performance, and I'm told this by a coach many years ago, and that is P minus I. So what is P minus I? It's our potential minus interference. But when we look at mental health, before I come back to potential minus interference and performance, there's one thing that's missing in this title, and that is the person. And I specifically say the person rather than the athlete. Why do I do this? Because when we just talk about the athlete, we forget that the athlete is more than just an athlete. And when the athlete has taken this on as their persona, that they're just an athlete, what happens when they come to the end of their careers? In their minds, they think, oh my goodness, I've got nothing left. But in fact, they have, because we need to remind them that you are more than what you do. So if we look at mental health and the person from a psychology perspective, so there's our person back in the frame, just to remind us. And we look at how do we, from a psychology perspective, see this person? So if you take health and wellness, this is probably where we start participating in sport. Why? Because it's good for us. It helps us to be healthy physically and mentally. So mind, body, and soul. We learn skills, we build relationships, we build character, we learn societal rules. And then in the middle there, we've got performance. So once we've been introduced to sport and we actually find we have some ability, we're encouraged to go to the next level. And then, of course, there are all the wonderful opportunities that sport brings. So what do? Then we focus on performance. And of course, what is it that we're doing when we're focusing on performance? We're increasing our fitness, our strength, our skill, our technical ability. We're healthy in mind and body, but that's only if we have the right environment. And sometimes when we're en route to performance and we don't have the right environment, we could be in a spot of bother. So this is where we might, in fact, initiate some kind of mental challenge for the person. It could be that we neglect the person because we don't listen to what they're saying, or when they're asking for help, we don't respond. We just push it aside and just focus on the performance in the particular sport. It could be harassment from peers, from coaches, from the administrative staff, abuse, bullying, hazing. So lots of harm that can, in fact, lead to a mental disorder. In the frame here, I have a picture of an athlete with their head bowed. I'm not for 1 minute saying that this athlete has a mental disorder, but I'm just really trying to illustrate a point that at some time in one's athletic career, one could, in fact, feel very down. So just talking about mental disorders. So if we're not doing the right thing in nurturing these individuals who come to us to participating in sport, then we can, in fact, really put them at risk. But we also need to keep in mind when we are involved in sport that people could, in fact, be susceptible to mental disorders or already have a diagnosis when they come to us. So we need to be aware and we need to be mindful in how we can, in fact, nourish and nurture this person. So what is a mental disorder? It's things like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder. And what happens when we have a mental disorder? There's significant disturbance in our thinking, in our emotions, in our behavior, and it's reflected in our psychological, biological, and developmental processes. And there's significant distress for us personally, socially, academically, and also occupationally. So just keeping that in mind. And of course, this is on a continuum. It could be really minor or it could be severe. But just putting mental disorders aside for a moment and going back to our P minus I, so the potential minus interference. So mental disorders or not looking after the athletes so that we do, they do land up in a spot of bother, that is interference. What other kinds of interference could one have? So we know that if I look at a broad strokes, globally, nearly 1 billion people live with mental disorders. Then they're low income populations, only 75% or less than 75% are able to receive treatment. Then 50% of persons with mental health challenges start by the age of 14 years. So these are the athletes that you will see involved in your sport, possibly. 20% of the world's children and adolescents have a mental health condition. So just keeping those factors in mind. Then globally, if we just take one mental disorder, and here we're looking at depression, more than 300 million people of all ages reportedly suffer from depression. That's 4.4% of the world's population. And heritability is 40%, which means that some of the athletes that you're going to be working with or playing with may in fact well be susceptible to depression. And then of course there's suicide that's linked to depression. And suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. And again, this is where you might be working with athletes, developing them in your sport. Then other interferences, and as you know, in the last 2 years, we've had COVID as an interference, whether it be our fears around COVID, our perceptions, or our reality. And some of us have really been affected badly by COVID. And World Health Organization stats show that there was a 25% increase in anxiety and depression worldwide. Other interferences, these are stresses that when we're working or in our daily if our sport is work. So the stresses like anticipatory stress, in other words, we worried about what might happen or what we can expect, or You know, are we going to have the game next week, or is it going to be postponed? So it's all of that anticipation. Then there's the time constraints. If one is working and studying and playing sport, or even just training for a particular sport, how do you fit everything in alongside your family commitments? Situational stress. This is in a particular aspect. So it might be an athlete who is having difficulty with a peer, or it might be with the coach. So some situational stressor that impacts on the person's life. And then encounter stressor. So this is where one might be attacked in inverted commas by abuse from a coach or from a peer. So just keeping all of that in mind in the workplace, which might be a professional athlete's life. Then closer to home for the athlete. So if we look at the red circle in the middle of this diagram, we have an athlete there named Anne, and Anne has a brother, and there's a mum and dad have parents. So that's the immediate family. And in this slide, we're really looking at relationships. So it's the relationships might be an interference within the family, or it might be with relationships with peers, with the medical staff, with competitors, with the coach, the club, friends, neighbors, the school, the university, your area of employment. So there are different levels of relationships. So in some might be very stressful or tense, but we also have to keep in mind that relationships may be very protective as well. So if it is interference, we need to be mindful of that. And this is why it's important to know every person that you are working with in whichever area of sport it might be. So you want to know your teammates. You want to know, as a coach, who are your team members. You want to know the leaders of your organization, because each and every one of us are regular human beings with good and bad aspects in our lives. The next point of interference could be when our actions are not in line with our values. This is very difficult for athletes, because it's often something that they haven't really thought about what their values are and what it is, this tension that's happening within themselves or within people in a given situation. So just being mindful of what are our values, and are we doing things that are in line with our values or not? So all of these points of interference can be very, very stressful. And when we're stressed, it impacts on our thinking, on our mind, it impacts our body, it impacts our behavior and our emotions. So all of this goes hand in hand with those interferences that might get in our way of being the best that we can be, or just being regular, healthy individuals. So how do we manage all of these stresses? And then that's by minimizing interference. So how do we do that? By being mindful of the things that are out of our control and accept that they are out of our control and we can do absolutely nothing about it. And that the things that are in our control, which if we want to, we can change. So the fact that we had COVID was out of our control, but what we could control was our relationship to the situation and how we could manage ourselves. So that's really key to managing interference and difficulty in our lives as people and as athletes. So how do we do this? How do we really hone in on minimizing that interference? And that is through cultivating awareness. So by cultivating awareness, and I'm going to elaborate on that a little more, we need to ask ourselves the questions. Are we mindful, or are our minds full? So just keeping that in mind. So what is mindfulness? It's to intentionally pay attention to what is present in the here and now. So what's present right now? Whether it's pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and to do that in a non-judgmental, kind, and compassionate way. So with ourselves, to really just start with, even when we're in a difficult spot in our lives, just actually pay attention to what's happening to me now. Even if it's unpleasant, just being kind, non-judgmental, and compassionate with myself. So just a little bit about mindfulness. It's a research-based intervention. It's founded in Western medicine, and it's derived from a practice called insight meditation. And really, in essence, it's a mental training. So what does that mental training encompass? So when we practice mindfulness, and mindfulness can be practiced formally or informally. When we practice mindfulness, we learn to be aware. We learn to be aware of sensations. In other words, touch, taste, smell, sight, and hearing. We learn to be aware of our emotions, our thoughts about thoughts, that's metacognition, and our behavior. We learn to be present in the moment. So when you're on the court, to just be on the court, not be worrying about things at home. We learn to pay attention. So we learn to focus attention, to switch attention, and to sustain attention. We learn patience, tolerance, kindness, compassion, and non-judgment. So this is the mental training that one would be exposed to if one practiced mindfulness. Why is that important to do that training and specifically cultivating awareness? Because when we're aware of what our thoughts are doing, then we can be mindful that our thoughts influence how we feel and how we behave. And all of these points, behavior, feelings, thoughts, they trigger each other. But thoughts are the most critical components because it's our thoughts that keep us in a spot of bother. So we can make up our own reality in our thoughts, but thoughts are just thoughts. They're not our reality. So when we're aware that in a difficult situation that, for example, let's say the ball did hit the ground and one's head drops because now one's feeling a little bit disappointed, just to be mindful, my head has dropped. Where are my thoughts gone? Perhaps I'm thinking, oh my goodness, not again, or why did I do that? Oh, how stupid of me. But really just catching oneself in that moment. It's just a thought and it's okay that things didn't go as I had hoped. Because remember, I said it's about being aware of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and it's okay. If something is out of one's control and one couldn't do anything about it, or if one made a mistake, that's also fine. So just really being aware of what's happening with our thoughts because it influences how we feel and how we behave. So what I'd like to do is to just give you a little sense of what it is to do a mindfulness practice. So this is an invitation for you to just take a moment and settle and ground yourself and give yourself permission just to be in this space for a few minutes. If it feels comfortable, you can close your eyes. Alternatively, you can lower your gaze. So when you're ready, just take a moment to become aware of physical sensations in your body. And start by noticing any and all sensations where your body makes contact with whatever surface you're sitting on. Notice the texture, notice the pressure, and notice the temperature. If there are no sensations, simply register a blank. That's perfectly okay. Now shift your awareness to your posture. Is it dignified, upright? Move awareness to the rest of the body. Notice your torso, your back, abdomen, and chest. Are your shoulders relaxed? Bring awareness to your hands, arms. Now bring awareness to your neck, head, and face. Take a moment to take in any and all sensations in the whole body. When you're ready, shift your awareness to the breath. Notice as the breath moves in and out of the body. Notice the in-breath and the out-breath. No need to change the way you breathe. Simply notice as the breath breathes itself. So for the next while, just keep the focus of your awareness on the breath. At any stage your mind wanders or you become distracted, notice where awareness has gone and simply escort the focus of your attention back to the breath. Each time your mind wanders, just gently escort the focus of awareness back to the breath. Just do that for a few moments, and I'll signal when the end of the practice is. Keeping the focus on the breath. When you're ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze and take in the virtual room again. So that was an example of a formal mindfulness practice. And I'd be interested to know what your experience was of that and really just some feedback on that little practice. Now, what we just did is termed focus attention meditation, and that is used in sport. It's more for closed skill sports. So where we do serial processing, like if you were participating in archery or gymnastics. We also have practices which we'll term open monitoring meditation, and that is more, it's less of a top-down, it's more of a parallel processing experience. And there we're looking at where one needs flexible attention. So you perform multiple actions at the same time. So the sport that you're involved in this would be very helpful for. And then there's also effortless presence meditation. But focused and open monitoring meditation are more the kinds of interventions one would do with sport. There's also mindfulness, informal mindfulness practices. And I put this in because I know people think, oh my goodness, I don't have time for that stuff. Why on earth would I be doing it? But we can just use moments in our lives to pause. So I put there at the traffic light, or while you're waiting for the train doors to open, just take a moment, settle and ground yourself, and then reflect on what am I thinking, feeling, and sensing. And just take a few moments to do a few breaths, just breathing in and breathing out. And then you can go on your merry way. You might also want to do this in a difficult situation. So sometimes when things are really tough, we react. And in mindfulness, we're actually saying the preference is to respond. And when do you respond? When you've paused, you've reflected on what your experience is, you've had a few breaths, and you think about the wisest way forward. So instead of reacting, we want to respond. Other mindfulness practices might be in the routine of brushing your teeth. Really notice every step of the way, from the time you put the toothpaste on the toothbrush till the time you rinse your mouth. just notice what it is you do. I bet you have no idea of how you go about brushing your teeth on a daily basis. Another way of changing habits and just being a little bit more mindful is to do something differently. So if you sit in the same place, during a meeting or when you're having your team talks, move around, sit somewhere else, just so that you break the pattern of that routine and that you give yourself a different experience. So informal mindfulness is just as helpful as formal mindfulness. So just very quickly, lots of research has been done on mindfulness since the sort of mid-1970s. I'm not going to go into all of the research, and what I have done is I've included for you some of the meta-analytic studies, some information around it to show that there's methodological rigor in the research. And in fact, mindfulness has been proven to work in many areas. As you can see there, I think you're welcome to these presentations and you can go through this for yourself, but you'll see that it's been very effective in stress, in reducing stress, in helping persons manage chronic pain, major depressive disorders, also anxiety. And then mindfulness is slowly, and I really want to pick up on what Barry said about the focus of mental health, well-being, and that very little has been done with persons with a disability, and also very little has been done in sport. So to my knowledge, there's nothing in terms of persons with a disability and mindfulness-based interventions. In sport in recent years, there's a number of articles that I've found, and I've given the links there. And then also in sport performance, but none, I'm afraid, that is associated with paravolley. But really, mindfulness in sport, the feedback is that there is long-term engagement in mindfulness meditation has been found to be effective in achieving optimal athletic performance through decreasing the level of anxiety, ruminative thinking, and enhancing the experience of flow. And then in another study, there is some tentative support for the use of mindfulness interventions for reducing competitive anxiety, attenuating immune responses to high intensity running, and increasing the state of mindfulness. But again, that was in running. So this is really just to give you a little taste of mindfulness and how it can help in terms of mental health and also performance. So really the thought I want to leave you with, and I in fact started with it when I looked at the heading of the webinar, I want to show you that. So you may see this is a whole lot of letters which you could look at in any particular way. And then if we look at it in another way, it says opportunity is nowhere. And then it says opportunity is now here. So again, I want to touch on the way we see the world, it maybe through different lenses. And we have to keep that in mind when we are working with persons with a disability, with persons in sport, and with each other in everyday lives. So thank you very much for your time. And at the end of the presentation, there's some links and ways in which to connect. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Debbie. Really powerful presentation and really nice chance to try out mindfulness. Huge thanks from the attendees as well as the panelists as well. We have some time for some questions and from the audience. And while people are writing that in, we did get some questions early on before the presentation. We've also had one within the presentation, but if you don't mind, I would like to ask a question in relation to to the Vista conference, something that I took back from the Vista conference. And this was that mental health was described as like an urgent area for intervention for para athletes. And it seems so that this would be the case if there's so little amount of research out there. But I was wondering if you may have become familiar with or could elaborate on how we may address this, given that COVID is still around at the moment. Do you have any thoughts about overall mental health in light of what you've described earlier, but also in terms of the COVID-19 situation?
Yes, look, I feel very strongly that we're not doing enough in the Paralympic movement and in parasport worldwide. In fact, I don't think we're doing enough in sport in terms of mental health. A lot needs to be done. And one of the challenges, I think, is that with all due respect to, is it Louise, who's the medical director? I think that a lot of the federations have psychology falling under medical. And I had that experience for many years. I was doing, in fact, put the policies in place for the South African NOC and NPC on psychology. And at that stage, I was inside the medical committee. And I realized that it wasn't going anywhere because we have different ways of looking at it. And so for 2 terms, I had that experience and it was very frustrating. But once I'd got onto the board and I was given the responsibility for high performance, first thing I did was to separate psychology from medical and to grow that, to in fact help psychologists to understand how to work with people in sport and to give persons in sport the opportunity to have those services, to engage with that. But it's a slow process, but one that we have to do. And I certainly am beating the drum on that, and I will not stop, not just from a performance perspective, but from a safeguarding perspective and from a perspective that athletes don't actually realize, what their rights are. And also what their responsibilities are, and we don't realize enough. So for me, I think that's important. From the COVID perspective, I must say that when COVID broke, it was a terrible thing for me, thinking about all the athletes who couldn't participate. And I, in fact, wrote a little blog. I did 10 articles for World Triathlon. I'm not very good at writing, but it was just something for them to hold on to, and it gave them links to different mindfulness practices, some poems, some uplifting kind of messages. And I think, and there are lots of those out there, because I remember doing a number of webinars with a number of psychologists. But I think that the challenge is that we are not communicating with others and we're not sharing. But what you're doing here with this webinar is fantastic. So well done to World Para Volley for what you're doing, because you're starting this journey and we can build on it, because there are plenty of people who have lots of skills in this area. And I'm also willing to share that link with you for World Triathlon and the blog. And it was specifically written for how to manage COVID for athletes.
Thank you. Thank you. I think this would be most welcome to have access to this blog for the athletes and the coaches to be aware of themselves and see some ways to handle the pandemic in a way of how it's affected their mental health. I really like the way that you've beaten on the drum and will continue to make the shift from the medical to the sport performance side of things. I suppose one of the, and you kind of answered one of the earlier questions, which was in relation to how do you see the role of IPC, and now this is with your hat on as on the governing board, to try to help the international federations like World Para Volley to make sure that mental health is a regular topic in training, that it's not just about going off to the gym and doing the physical exercising and And so is that a future direction that potentially IPC is looking to do?
You know, that discussion started when I joined the board in the previous term, and it will be ongoing because I will certainly keep it going, particularly in pushing the safeguarding agenda. We have a lot of work to do there, and the work in supporting athletes from a psychology perspective is part of that. For me, athlete health, safety, fairness, well-being is absolutely paramount. So from that perspective, we also need to remember we had a medical director resign. We need to be looking at that. I would like to see a separate psychology group from medical and the IPC. And yes, the safeguarding, and then also the science and research. So the more science and research we can do, and I think, you know, APSO can also play a role in sharing information amongst the members of APSO. Those are all the IFs. We can do more there. So lots to do, but we can only do it together because there's so few who can make a difference. But what I can tell you is that in South Africa, for example, we set up a project where we have psychologists who in fact volunteer their help, or they do it at a reduced fee. And so the athletes are given a list of who are the psychologists that are available that they can turn to if they need help with performance or just difficult life situations. So those are also, you know, we could set up a resource network to see who is able to contribute. Plenty of psychologists out there, especially in the greater sort of cities and countries.
Yeah, I think this is an essential resource. It sounds like a very important resource for access to athletes to have access to, as well as their support teams as well. So that sounds like a really good initiative, and it would be really good. It's good to hear that you're continuing on with that at the governing board level. Just to follow up on this before I go to what was asked in the chat, very briefly, is that you're now touching upon the professionalization of the psychologist and the role of the psychologist. And when you bring up earlier in your presentation, you had issues around acceptance, and to me, I hear the acceptance, and there's been in the last few years the acceptance, commitment therapy, ACT, and mindfulness as quite similar to each other, but they're also distinctive. So with that in mind, and with you know, ACT being acceptance, commitment therapy, are we starting to see a level playing, well, not level, but an equal amount or a difference in those athletes that may require the therapy side of things, or whether we're starting to see the more practice of the mindfulness? Is that how to look at it? Are they covering the same thing?
It's interesting because I've been watching the journey of ACT over the years, and it seems that more and more of the mindfulness is filtering into that work, and also psychologists working, you know, in their practices or with athletes, more and more of the mindfulness is filtering in. But you know what's so powerful about mindfulness is that it puts the control back into the person's hands. So yes, as psychologists, we can sit and we listen and we can impart some knowledge and advise and guide, but this gives them something to do for themselves. And that for me is powerful, because it's not just the expertise of the psychologist, it's the expertise of the person, and you work together. Their expertise and the psychologist's expertise, and together you find a way. But it empowers the person to take control of their own lives. And that's important, because psychologist is not going to be there to hold their hands for the rest of their lives, but it just teaches skills. It teaches an understanding of why is it, what is this about? How do I understand it? How do I relate to it in a different way? because we can, and that is the beauty of neuroscience, is that we can change the neural networks in our brain through our practice. And mindfulness has shown this.
Yes, thank you. I mean, we do have more questions, but I'd like to leave that to the panel, because I think there are some practical questions, which on that note, I think you've left us with a really good thing to be thinking about in terms of how athletes would actually use this in practice. So I think it's a really good turning point to maybe, if we start to go to the next presenter. So thank you very much, Debbie, for your time at the moment. We shall meet with you back in a short while. And let me just now like to present our next presenter. So we now have Greg, who is a 2020 Tokyo Paralympic Games gold medalist in shot put and a former Canadian men's sitting and standing volleyball player. Before the meeting, we were all hearing of how we all met him in Roermond in 2006 in the standing competition. And to just talk about his history, he competed in parasports for over 20 years. And yet he had never made it to the Paralympic Games until Tokyo. So in his journey, he would like with everyone else, he's found it extremely challenging at times and incredibly fun at others. So one of his biggest challenges has been his mental health, and he's here to talk with us about his story. So I would, if we can just get Greg to just start his video. Would you like to open up your video? Thank you.
Yeah, there we go. I can see myself.
Thank you, Greg. Okay.
Wonderful. Well, Kwok, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate this. And first of all, Debbie, such incredible information. There's so much around the mental health, especially in sport these days. And I totally agree. Parasport is definitely, I'm not going to use the word lacking, but could use immense support across parasport, across what do you call it, athlete values, support, everything like that. Because ultimately, we all want this sense of belonging. You know, we all want this sense of being a part of something. And when you have the Olympics versus the Paralympics, and you have, you know, always these differences and whatnot, if we're able to actually present ourselves with the opportunity of inclusion and feeling equal, then I think we're going to create more mental health. We're going to create more acceptance and more inclusion for everyone. So thank you very much for presenting that, because taking that deep breath definitely helped me calm down before my talk coming up here. So thank you, everyone. Debbie, Elvira, many other panelists that are sitting here today, and of course, a lifelong friend, former manager, Phil Allen, when I was on our national standing and seated volleyball team. So thank you for being here, and to all the participants for taking part to potentially learn maybe a little bit more than what you knew this morning or this afternoon or this evening. Here's an opportunity for you to see yourself for who you are, to understand more about how you feel, how you think, how you understand, what you accept, and how you move forward. As we are always growing, we are always looking to learn more, do more, and experience more. And it starts with our mental health. And ultimately, in the end, I may want to throw a shot put or serve a volleyball or whatever, but if I don't mentally show up, it doesn't matter how good I am, I'll never be there. And so today, I thought I would actually just share with you guys kind of how my journey has been in sport. Like Kwok had discussed, it had taken me almost 20 years to make it to the Paralympic Games. Well, it did take me 20 years. And it started when I was playing standing volleyball in 2001, so 21 years ago. My journey has had lots of ups and downs, and it's been challenging ones at times. So I'm just going to get into the thick of it. I know I only have 10, 15 minutes here, so I'll get right at it. I think it's really important that we take the opportunity to listen to our body and not what our mind is telling us. Our body is like our barometer. Our body will let us know how we're actually feeling, whereas our mind will constantly tell us other stories, potentially lie to us, do things that don't actually pair up with us. And it's important to connect these two so that we can actually have an experience that means something to us. And so why I wanted to start with that at the beginning is because that's how I wasn't connected when I first started my journey. So 21 years ago, I was 14 years old and I was 6'8". So I was about 200, or I guess I'd be roughly 190 centimeters tall. So being 14 and quite tall, all of a sudden I started hearing these conversations in my head and from other people's. And those conversations would, hey, Greg, you would be really good at basketball. You would be really good at volleyball. And for those who don't know, I am missing my left arm. As you can see, I was born this way. And ultimately, for myself and many disabled athletes and almost everybody in the world, like I said at the beginning, we want to have this sense of belonging. We want to feel the sense of being part of something, to feel whole, feel complete, to feel loved. And so when I hear this conversation of people being like, hey, you'd be really good at this, hey, you'd be really good at that, I'm now having a conversation in my head being like, oh man, I'm going to be really good at this. Hey, my height's going to help me. These people are telling me, this external component is telling me that I'm going to be good at something. But actually, what was going on was my body was telling me, ugh, this is yucky. This is icky. Do you actually want to put in this time? Is this something you really wanted to commit to? And so I did choose to go and start playing volleyball in high school, basketball in high school, everything like that. But for a very long time, I had this uncomfortable feeling as I was training, as I was competing. And I had a really hard time committing. I had a really hard time committing to my sport, committing to training, committing to, all the extra time required and needed in order to be the best at my sport. Now, don't get me wrong, I did really well. My height has definitely helped me. My time on our national disabled volleyball team, we won 3 world championships, 1 World Cup. We were definitely a stronghold and we did extremely well. And then I switched over to seated volleyball, where we had to learn again. We had to take the opportunity to actually learn the game, not standing, but seating. And that was quite difficult. But throughout that entire journey, I never made it to the Paralympic Games. But on top of it too, I kept having these kind of uncomfortable feelings. Like, is this actually what I want to be doing? My mind kept saying, yeah, you're going to fit in. You're going to be a part of something. This is going to be great, everything like that. Yet I'd still kind of actually feel gross within myself. And so I was constantly kind of in this place of fighting. What I'm doing, is this what I really want to do or do I not? And I found myself playing university basketball at Thompson Rivers in Canada, back in my hometown of Kamloops, BC. And it was my very last year. And I remember I tried to quit 3 times. Every time my coach said, hey, you made a commitment to this team. You made a commitment to yourself. You got to follow through on this. And I think it was a really important lesson to teach me. And one thing my coach always told me was learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And, it's really stuck with me for many, many years, like 10, 15 years now from that. Because what it's really shown me is even though, I'm having this kind of, this isn't connected to here and it's really uncomfortable, I'm learning a lot. I'm learning about these opportunities. I'm learning about these experiences. I'm learning about what it is that I actually want to do and what I don't want to do. And through all of that, I was successful. But then I chose to actually stop playing all sports in general. And that's when I actually got to look at myself on more of just a basic level. And by basic, I mean, I wasn't playing high performance sports. I was just kind of working, living life. And what I actually came to realize is what I was never connected. My mind was telling me I was going to be good at something, but my body was telling me I didn't want to do it. And what that took was, Debbie hit it, is it took a level of mindfulness. It took a level of me to actually understand and learn about two really important things. And I apply these to sport, but I also apply these to my daily life. And the first one of those is, what is my personal integrity? What does integrity look like to me? Am I a 7'2" one-arm basketball player? Is that my identity? Is that my integrity? What are my values? What do my beliefs look like? Am I somebody that works hard? Am I somebody that likes to party? Am I somebody that likes to commit to my word? Am I somebody that is unsure what the next day? Am I somebody that plans? You know, integrity is an extremely important thing because it holds so much to it. I just have, you know, a couple of things here, you know, it's following through on your word. So if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. Because if I don't, it brings me to my next word, and I'll come up to it in a bit. Acting on my values and my beliefs. Is this something I actually believe in? If I do it, am I going to feel bad? If I don't do it, am I going to feel bad? Right? How am I actually going to feel regarding my values, regarding my beliefs? Because these are things that are really important to us. And then understanding what my second word is. And that is, you know, well, sorry, understanding truths. I misread it there. But it's, is this true to me? Is this actually what I believe in? And so integrity plays a huge role. And I started to actually realize that by looking at myself on another level, being mindful of the concept of, oh, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm hearing, but this is what my body's telling me. You know what? That's actually maybe look at it a different way. And then it brings me to my next point, and that is trust. Trust is a very important word. I think it's just as important integrity. I think of integrity and then an umbrella. And the very first word after integrity is trust. I can almost put trust above integrity. But that is trust. Trust, 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 trust. Trust that the work you have done is correct. No other way around it. You are doing a good job. Trust that you are doing a good job. Trust that the work, the time, the energy, everything you put in is exactly how it's supposed to be. Trust in it. There's a concept that I've been playing around actually as of late. The concept is I can't do it wrong. And the reason is because I'm trusting in all the thoughts, or not so much the thoughts, sorry, but I'm trusting in all of my choices and all of my decisions that have got me to this point. For me to be able to trust actually puts me in the now. It puts me in the fact that I'm staring at a camera right now with Canada written across it, talking to all of you beautiful people, and trusting that no matter what happens, it's going to be okay. And that my decisions and my choices that got me here today are exactly what are meant to be. And I know it's kind of a tough one to understand it, you know, right off the bat, but trusting that, you know, things are going to be okay. And I apply these to my sport in everyday situations. And so, you know, these are two really kind of, you know, important things that I've always applied to my sport, into my daily lives. And so going back to kind of my journey, after kind of having an idea of what my integrity looked like beyond basketball and volleyball, and then I was actually able to start trusting in the steps and the processes that I was taking to get to me to this next day, to this next month, this next year, I came across shot put. But of course, what did I hear? Oh man, you're tall, you're big, you got one arm, man, you'd be really good at shot put. Oh, I'm hearing something. I'm listening to this thought, but what's my body telling me now? Okay, well, you know, based on my integrity and my values, you know, my integrity is saying that, you know what, I'm truthful to my word. And I said, yeah, you know, I'll give it a shot. No pun intended, but maybe a pun intended. But hey, I'll give it a shot anyways. I tried it out and I'm like, okay, you know what? So far, this is working out for me. I'm going to work hard. Okay, cool. So my integrity all of a sudden is now playing a role in all the steps that I'm taking. But on top of it too, I'm now in a place where I'm like, I can trust that no matter what my decision is or my outcome is, I'm going to be okay. That the things that are said, the work that's put in, the decisions I've made, the choices I've accepted, or even the decisions I've accepted, that they're all going to be okay. And so then I start to really apply all of those into my sport, into shot put. And then the next thing I know, I have a phone call 4 years later, and they're like, "Hey, Greg, we just want to let you know that you've made it to the first Paralympic team for Canada for the Tokyo 2020 Games." Well, I'll tell you, I probably cried for like 10, 15 minutes, chatted with my mom, you know, crying and being like, "Oh my goodness, this is actually happening." But it's because I had this level of integrity to myself, because this is actually something I started to want. It was something that, you know, when I played basketball and volleyball, you wouldn't catch me getting up at 5 a.m. to go training because I didn't want to be doing this. Whereas I did in shot put, because I had that trust, because I had that integrity in myself. Hey, I'm going to show up in the morning and work hard. Okay, awesome. I'm going to do it. Even if my coach wasn't going to be there, I was still going to put in the time, put in that effort, and trust that it was going to be okay. And so I'm going to the Paralympic Games. That's crazy. And when I went to these games, I know you guys we already know, but you know, I won this. Right? It's a gold Paralympic medal. There's no way in my mind did I think I was going to win this. Because one, I didn't have the intent to go in to win a medal. I went in with the level of integrity and trust that no matter what the outcome is, I'm still going to be okay. That I can trust that all my hard work is going to pay off. That because I stuck to a place of integrity, that I followed through on my word, I followed through on my hard work, that no matter what the outcome is, I was still going to be okay. I was still going to be great. In sport is such a weird thing. Like it really, really is. Because if you think about sport as a whole, all of us here, you know, whether we're a volleyball player or a basketball player or a shot put thrower or whatever, our goal is to obtain this. Our goal is to win. Our goal is to achieve this greatness. Our goal is this. But in order to achieve that, you have to let go of it and focus on right now. Because if you're not in the now, there's no way you're going to achieve that now, because there's so much work that goes in between. And it's such an interesting concept, but it's something we need to remember on a regular basis. And going back to Debbie, young lady, just hearing your words and everything like that just really, really hit like the nail on the head. And it's so important that we just stop and be mindful, right? Readdress our integrity, readdress our trust, allow ourselves to be aware of where we are, right? Taking that moment to actually be in the moment, knowing that I can trust this past because it created my today. Trusting, being in place of integrity. I think my time's coming up here, but I wanted to talk again really briefly of, it's a concept that I go by often, and that is own today so you can create tomorrow. And what that means is take charge. Take charge of your actions today and understand them and accept them. By me knowing that the work that I'm going to put in today is going to allow me to be better tomorrow. Even if today is the worst training day or the worst day of your life, there's always going to be tomorrow. And I can trust that if I own everything, if I own my feelings, if I'm sad, if I'm angry, or whatever I'm feeling, if I'm in that right now, and I take charge of it, and I accept it and understand it, tomorrow will be a better day. It's if I don't, if I see these things that if I have, you know, conversations that I'm supposed to be having with people and I don't take charge of it, I'm going to still feel the same way tomorrow. But if I take care of it now, it will create a better day tomorrow. And so I just want to say, I greatly appreciate everyone here. Phil, again, thank you for reaching out. This has honestly been such an incredible experience listening to Debbie. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Elvira and everyone. You know, I wish you all the very best. I look forward to seeing you guys on the world stage. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for sharing your story. It's really helpful for everybody here and all our listeners about your journey and how you began, and your way, what your body was telling you and what your mind was telling you, or what you've been told for your mind. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And also linking in with what we've already had shared earlier from Debbie's presentation as well. We have a question that's come in on the chat that I can address straight away. And it's quite relevant to you. And it's something that I was also thinking of as well. And it's where did you get in your story, in your journey, at what points and where were the sources of learning these two important aspects, the integrity and the trust?
Great question. And I know I didn't talk about it a whole lot because I could be here for a few hours, but so when I finished playing university basketball in 2011, I struggled because I had my identity attached to me as a basketball player, not me as Greg Stewart. And so I was in a place of feeling frustrated, inability to focus, just that sense of loss. Like, who am I? What am I doing? Like, am I a college student? Am I a basketball player? Or like, what am I? And so after about 3 years of getting fired from a couple jobs and, experiencing life that way, I actually chose to kind of step into some mindfulness practices, and I reached out to it was called Breath Integration Coaching and Training Center in Kamloops, where I'm from, but they're accessible throughout the world. And I honestly did group therapy. And one of the biggest things that I've learned through that type of work and that mindfulness practices and tools that I've been giving is that, how many of us are on this call, right? There's 64 participants. There's 8 of us in the panelists. So we have 72 people here. There's 72 people here that are experiencing anything and everything. All of our scenarios can be different, but our emotional reaction or our emotional response is all the same. So whether we lose a family member or we lost the big game, we're probably going to go through the steps of grief and be angry, but we're also going to be sad. Now, those scenarios are completely different, but our responses are the same. And so by learning that through this group therapy, learning how I actually react to things and how I want to actually learn to respond to them has given me more of an understanding of who I am. And then through many other practices of understanding what I call my 5 main emotions, there's fear, guilt, sadness, anger, and then love and joy. And it's identifying those and using those. And I have a bunch of information on that if you'd like to see it. But it just allows me to actually start to work with, okay, well, this is what my body's telling me. I'm not going to listen up here. Okay, well, I'm feeling really hot and sweaty in palms, or maybe I'm feeling really angry right now. Well, it's an opportunity for me to express that anger in a safe place so that I can move through it and move on. And so that's, like I said, I could talk about this for a long time, but it was tools like that that really taught me to be more mindful of how I was actually feeling. And we're all athletes here. And let's be honest, how often do we look at our body in terms of how sore we are, how when we have little injuries, we are constantly monitoring our body. But now is an opportunity to constantly monitor our actual thoughts connected to our body, and then understand how to use that and the tools to move through those.
Thank you. So just to summarize the response in terms of the respondents, the people you got it from was through the group therapy per se. And when you put that back into sport, was the level of support for those actions were they aware that you were, you've got this awesome way of being aware of your own body and aware of your mind?
I think we're getting to it, but I think honestly the best way is lead by example. Vulnerability is key. Like I said, learn to be comfortable being uncomfortable. There is no, without conflict, there is no growth, right? If you want to hang out in the comfort zone, all the best to you, but it's tough to learn something from there. Learn to step out, learn to actually voice how you're feeling. And no matter what people say or anything like that, that's your truth, and own that, right? And I think that is going to play a big role moving forward, is that the athletes ourselves vocalize how we're feeling, but not just throwing it out there, but actually understanding what it is that you're feeling, so that when you are sharing and you're sharing from a place of vulnerability, people are understanding and people can actually feel it too. because like I said before, we're all so interconnected. We all feel very, very similarly. So then if you can actually have an authentic feeling with yourself, I will guarantee you somebody else will have that same experience and feel it for you. So I think we are the points. I think we are the people that are going to help change this. As grateful as I am for all of the, the doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists and everything like that are leading the way there, it's also going to come down to the athletes speaking up on behalf of ourselves. So I don't know, I think I kind of went off topic, but
no, not at all. Not at all. I think that's certainly helpful tips as well of how you lead by example, and how the sport then supports you to carry on to do that. When I mean the sports, as in like the coaches as well.
I guess, but going back to like, I think it's best like who to reach out to. Reach out to your coach. If your coach doesn't know, find a local support network. And the thing right now, support can look like anything, right? It could be literally having a conversation with your family, right? Being able to just have your voice heard speaks volume, right? But if you want to take it to the next step, reach out to a professional. If you have the opportunity to, I'm always open to having conversations with people, right? And so, reach out to whoever and whatever is available to you, because it will make a difference. We are not in this alone. We are all going through the same thing. So.
Yeah, I suppose that links in with what Debbie was saying about what the IPC is able to provide a list of sports psychologists and people working in sports psychology to know if you need to reach out, that there could be potential people to help there. We're getting lots of people that are sharing and their thanks and some comments in the chat about hearing the athlete's voice, and one very interesting comment coming from Rowena is the issue of talent ID, and the way that talent ID has been working, and potentially these early voices that you've been receiving were to say that you'll be good at this and you'll be good at that is through this regime of talent identification. But obviously that they're looking at the physical aspect of things and not the mental side of things, the mental aspect. So would you have rather had been assessed at some point through the talent identification? Would that have been appropriate to you, do you think?
Was I ever assessed? Is that what you mean?
I suppose not, but
well, I guess in a way, because I was assessed on a social thing, like just because of my height. But I think it's important too that like I kind of said before, showing up plays a big role too. I know talent, like for instance, in Canada, we have RBC training grounds, right? Where we're, hosting more Olympic, Paralympic athletes, but they're not them. They're just general people. Come and check it out and see if what you have and what you got and everything like that. But I think it's important to also recognize that it takes courage just to show up. Right. And so in a way, that person's already creating that talent ID identification because they showed up. But at the same time too, like, I think we need to look at, we are looking at their physical. We have to look at their mental. Right. And I think one of the questions, a simple one, maybe not that simple, but is, do you want to be here? Why are you here? Are you following friends in? Are you following, because you want to become the greatest? Actually ask those questions, because those honestly can have far more of an impact on the actual training, because then you're knowing if they're going to be there or not. So, yeah.
I think we're coming to the end of the Q&A session right now. There are certain topics that I'd like to bring back to the panel discussion at the end. I think we can already identify areas that both you and Debbie are able to discuss together as well. So before that, we have one more presentation from Elvira. So I'd just like to thank you, Greg, for your time in this direct presentation. and we will shift the,
Thank you very much.
thank you. Shift this to the next presentation. So since 2001, so same time as when Greg had been playing volleyball as well, Elvira has played for the Dutch women's sitting volleyball team. She and her team have won medals at the World Championships, European Championships, and Paralympic Games. Elvira competed at 3 Paralympic Games in Beijing, London, and Rio, and was team captain for 10 years. World Championships in Rotterdam 2018 was her last tournament. Elvira was an athlete representative on the IPC's Athlete Council and World Para Volley Athletes Commission. She works as a policy officer at the Ministry of Welfare and Sport at the Sports Department, and her main goal is to contribute to an inclusive world of sport. During her sitting volleyball and work career, mental health has always been high on the agenda. I'd like to welcome you, Elvira. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Kwok. And thank you everyone for being here and listening to all the amazing words and presentations from both Deborah and the speech of Greg. And with Greg, it was very recognizable, some of the things he said. And one thing I wrote down, because he said that he had sometimes felt that he was not mentally, that he mentally not showed up. And that is so recognizable, because when you're an athlete, it's sometimes so difficult to put in your mentally game on bet or something. And then especially when you work in a team, then the whole team needs to be mentally show up. So that's very difficult, but very recognizable. So very, Greg, thank you for sharing that with us. I'm going to share a presentation for you. I think you now can see it. So what I would like to do, because I called my presentation Mental Health as part of a full and complete training program for every athlete, and both during and after the career, because like Kwok just mentioned, I quit my career and retired in 2018. So that's also a challenge when you retire, I could tell you that. But first, I would like to tell you something about what we accomplished in our team and how we did that. Because in 2001, I started playing sitting volleyball. And it was, for me, a sort of decision which was difficult, because before that, I was born with my disability as well. And in my youth, I didn't want anything to do with disability sports. So I just wanted to be normal and just not be comparing myself with other people who have an impairment. But when I came out of puberty, I think that was sort of the main thing for me when I started changing in that mind. And then I wanted to play sports, and I wanted to play sports at my own level with people also at my own level, and see how far I could come. So I started playing sitting volleyball, and I think because of the sports, but also because of the coach I then had, Jose Banfi, that made me stay there forever, because I retired from the national team in 2018, but I'm still playing at the club in the Netherlands now. So it was sort of love at first sight. That's how I introduce it always. But when I started playing, when you are a Paralympic athlete and you have an impairment, there are some good things and bad things about developing very fast, because there are not a lot of players in a country, and especially not a country in the Netherlands. So when they see you playing for a club, and although you just started playing, they will ask you to come up to the national team and train with them. And that gives a big opportunity for you to grow very fast and develop very fast, because you play and train with great athletes. But it's also bad, because when you go play in a national team and make the decision to change sort of your whole life, because you have to put in the effort, you have to put in your whole time, you don't see your friends or family a lot anymore. So the commitment Greg also told about is a very difficult. You have to be very conscious about that decision. And in my case, it was sort of you rolled into the national team. And like for 2 years later, I started realizing exactly like Greg was saying, what am I doing here and why am I doing that? So I think like 7 or 8 months before the Paralympic Games in Athens, I decided to quit and take a break because I really needed to calm down and make sure that was expected from me in training time and not being social anymore or whatever. I need to take that back, make some time for my study and make sure that I could make my own decision about coming to a national team and what are the consequences of that. So after the Athens Paralympic Games, like I think a couple of months later, then I came back to the sport, back to the national team, and it was a very conscious decision. And I also then had my own goals to achieve and wanted to go to the Paralympic Games myself and wanted to achieve the goals we had with the team. So that was a conscious decision then. And like I said, never left it again after that decision. So during my career, I also found it very important to make sure that the athlete's voice was heard, and that was taken seriously. So therefore, I sat on several athletes' councils, like in my introduction, both in the Netherlands as international. So yeah, an important role for me, the athletes' council member. So besides playing volleyball, I also always worked at the policy as a policy officer in the Ministry of Health, Welfare and Sports. And I found that combination very strong because as an athlete, you are sort of in a sort of tunnel vision and the only thing that counts is sports, volleyball, practice, your team, etc. And if you walk off the court and you come to a whole new world or a different world, then it also gives you a sort of reality check or something. So for my own mental health, I think the combination between work and between para-volley was very good. And now, since I quit playing volleyball, I'm also a mother, and that also gives some new challenges because my husband and I adopted a son in 2019. I will tell something more about that later because it was a sort of life-changing event after quitting with sitting volleyball in the national team, but also a blessing to see how he is growing up and how he is getting older and older and also loves sport very much. In the next slide, I want to tell you something because I said mental health was playing a part during my career and after my career. And at first, I want to tell you something about how it played a role during my career. Because when I came back and started playing sitting volleyball again for the national team, it was like 2005, I think, then we started our journey to the Beijing Paralympic Games. And like I was saying, during those periods and during those qualification moments and period, it takes a lot of pressure and a lot of expectations from people for how you perform as a team and how you act. So during the Paralympic Games in Beijing, I experienced for the first time how mental health was an important part of the career, because as the Dutch team, we had won several medals. We won everything in the journey to Beijing. We won the World Championships, we won the European Championships, we won the Europe Cup. So we were doing great. And then during the Paralympic Games, it's different because a Paralympic Games is so different from other events that you went through. So there's more tensions. There are more people who have an opinion about how you perform as a team. There are people who criticize you. In the Netherlands, the media wants to know something about you. So it's more different than when you go to a World Championships or European Championships. And that pressure for our team, that was new for me. So we won some matches, and then to the semifinals, we played against USA. And USA is a very strong team, but before that match, we won every time from them. So during that match, it was on and off. So the first set was for them, second for us, now third, so and so on and so on. And then in the fifth set, we were behind. So Team USA was 14, we were up to 9 or 10, I think. And then I was up to serve. And what I experienced there, it was like my body was my own body. So I experienced there some stress, which I didn't recognize at that moment. And I served in the net and we lost the match. So we lost our chance for gold or for silver, and we had to fight for bronze. And that was difficult because we had to pull our team together again and then played for the bronze final 2 days later. We won that one because with our team, we could pull ourselves together and make sure that we get back with our winning hat on court, so that we won the bronze medal. But it was for me a strange situation. And after Beijing Paralympic Games, I started to analyze where that was coming from. And for me, then I started to work with a personal coach, but a personal mental coach, and make sure that I know what was happening there and why my body didn't feel like my body anymore. And I couldn't do a normal serve like I used to do. So she taught me what my triggers were and my negative triggers, why there was some uncertainty during the match and why a difficult situation in the match made me uncertain about my own performances. And it has to do with expectation, it has to do with pressure, it has to do with maybe the way of coaching or whatever. And she taught me how to be with myself and perform only on my focus only on my task and what I have to do with the next ball. So see what you have to do and how you have to do it. Focus on your own thing and then make sure you be more secure about that. So it's not some like one session then you perform there. It has to do with a whole process. So like for 3 years I worked with her, because you have to implement it in training and you have to implement it also in your matches, and then in the matches where the pressure is very high, and make sure then you can reach out of your toolbox and make sure you can use them at the right moment. So that was very meaningful for me. Then after Beijing, we got a new head coach and he worked with the action typing. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but action typing is about the fact that everyone has a sort of unique set of deep motivational drives and action preferences in the way you move, think, and act. So body and mind comes together. The combination has to work. So that my body didn't do what I'd like to do or what I'm used to do, that was just because of stress. And it's very interesting because if you know what kind of type you are, and I wrote down in this presentation sometimes types, it's not really necessary to get into that, but it's very good for your coach to know what your preferences are. So if I'm a more extrovert person or a more introvert person, then it says something about how I would like to strike or what my favorite position on court is. The thing about this is it's really important how it's implemented and how it's used by your coach and by your staff, and how it's also in your program as a normal thing or just some kind nice team building practice or whatever. Because if your coach or your guidance is not knowing how to use it and how to use it on you or how to use it on your team, then it sort of disconnects. It disconnects between you as a player and the coach, and it also disconnects between the players. And we saw that happening during our journey to London, that we had a sort of disconnected team who were 6 individuals on court and didn't know how to perform with each other. So after London, and we came back as the fourth place, our new head coach worked with insights. And insights is more to do about how you work as a team and how are you. And you see on my presentation in the blue and the red and the yellow and the green, what sort of personal preferences you have. And if you know that from your players and your co-players, and if you know that from your coach, then it's a sort of understanding and trust each other to make sure you play as a team and not as individuals. So you can see that how we were individuals before London, we became a team before Rio. And that was very cool to experience. So we had some different methods during my career, different challenges as well. Like I told you about the high expectations, high pressure, stress about, for example, classifications or other stuff in a team sport like this and Paralympic. You have to deal with all kinds of things that are not in your influential circle. And it's very good that you learn how to use your tools to make sure that all the things that are outside your influence, you sort of locked out and make sure you go to your focus as a team. Yeah, so that was during my career what we have experienced with mental health. And then after my career in 2018, I also experienced things I really didn't thought that I would experience them, because I always combined my volleyball career with work, so I didn't think of any black hole after I quit or retired the national team. But I quit in 2018, and after that, sort of 3 life-changing events happened. So my father passed away in the first year. We had Janos coming into our lives because we adopted him a year later. And then, like when he was 2 months with us in the Netherlands, the lockdown and COVID came down. So that was very strange, and all those situations or events sort of made me not stood still by that I wasn't a Paralympic athlete anymore, but a former Paralympic athlete, and that I now was a normal mother who was working, etc., etc. And I saw that that was a quite difficult, I think, in the beginning of this year, actually, because then the lockdown started to open up a bit more. The sports began again. You saw that the qualification tournaments during the Olympic Games and the Paralympic Games started again, and I couldn't watch them because I found it very difficult to watch the matches, to watch the sitting volleyball players perform. And later I thought to myself, it's because I'm sort of in a belated mourning process for not being a Paralympic athlete anymore. I also quit all kinds of international committees or whatever. So the whole sport was sort of out of my life. And due to COVID, also the club competition was laid down. So I didn't have a connection with sitting volleyball anymore. And that was quite difficult. So during the Paralympic Games and Olympic Games, and also we started the competition in sitting volleyball again in the Netherlands. And that really helped me to be more connected with that. Also, I started getting in touch again with the players who were performing during the Paralympic Games. Starting with the award committee with World Para Volley. And all those things sort of made me accept, okay, my life is now different. And also I'm not a Paralympic athlete anymore, but I'm a former Paralympic athlete and a mother and a working person and whatever. So I accept more myself as a person now than a few months ago. So that was kind of a difficult moment where guidance was really also difficult to find. So yeah, I think for my message, if you look at what is needed, then I wrote down a couple of things for you, maybe just to summarize or take with you. But if you look at my mental health and the attention for that during my career, I think it should be really a part of your full-time training program. So not just a team buildings day or whatever. It has to be both on court and off court, but you have to take the time for it as a team and as an athlete and as a coach and staff as well. You have the responsibility as an athlete yourself because you have to look down at yourself, see what is happening with me, what do I feel in my body, and what do I feel in my mind. So you have to take action yourself as well. You have to be open for different methods, but I also think it's really important to choose a method at some point, because we as a team had different methods, and you have to dive into a method and make sure you can use that at the moments when it's really necessary, and that's when the pressure is high enough. Then you need to make sure that it's so in your system that you can use it whenever you need it. Quality of guidance is very important. Quality of implementation and execution also very crucial. The balance between performance and atmosphere, especially in a team. You have to make sure that it's a friendly team who understands each other, who trust each other, but also can perform together. So it has to be in balance. And there is a balance between individuals and teams. Like, I'm a team player, but I'm also Elvira, and I'm also myself with my own feelings and my own uncertainties, certainties, you name it. But it has to deal with each other, and that is an important thing, I think. And then for the retired athletes, I think the hit does not always come when you just quit and the day next you have a sort of hit or feel that you are not the athlete anymore, but it also can come years later. So that's very difficult, I think, to understand, but I think it's important that we understand that. So stay connected with retired athletes. That's the message I would like to send to you. And for now, thank you for listening. Looking forward to the panel questions now later on, and I give you the word back, Kwok.
Thank you, Evia. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for your insights and how you've experienced the games as a former sitting volleyball player and how you've come to terms with retiring as an athlete, that is. Yeah, I have a few questions that I would like to address to you directly before we get into the panel, if that's okay, in terms of this transition. So you mentioned quite a lot about this transition and the type of guidance or lack of guidance that you had. So you mentioned one tip of what you might have done differently in terms of being in contact with other retired athletes. But I wonder if there's other areas that may have helped with maybe a softer landing by the sounds of things. It seemed like it was quite a drastic change. So physiologically it was different and psychologically it's potentially different as well. What other things would you have wanted to have done differently as you went into retirement from being an athlete?
Well, I think like it was for me a very conscious decision to retire, and also to retire after the World Championships in Rotterdam. So I worked through that, and also my team worked through that. And it was a good moment because I really was tired of sitting volleyball at that moment, tired in my mind of it and tired in my body as well. And also the federation at that moment had a good saying goodbye. So that was all very good. But I think what I then should have done different is that I quit everything. So I quit playing sitting volleyball also in the club, because I thought I don't want anything to do with sitting volleyball for a few months, just relax and not do anything with that. I also retired from all the international committees and wanted to focus on some certain stuff. And I think that's too harsh. I think you have to slow down and maybe also play sitting volleyball in the club, or make sure that you get attached or you stay in touch with athletes or with sitting volleyball players or sitting volleyball. I think that is important. And also I didn't reach out to my federation. So they had done a great job for my retirement at the moment of the World Championships, but that was it. And I also sort of lost my connection with my federation in the Netherlands. And I think I have to, if I wanted to do it differently, then I would stay more in touch as well with them.
Yeah, I think this is maybe, it could be a two-way conversation in terms of, are the federations also prepared to continue with the communication with retired athletes as well? I suppose another question that leads from this is that if you wanted to stay in contact with the federation, what barriers do you experience with staying in the sport, whether it's through coaching or doing other board work for the International Federation, for example?
Well, it's also sort of a barrier that I was used to being an athlete. And when I talked to the federation, I was an athlete or in an athletes council member, for example. And if you're not in that role anymore, then it's very difficult to see, well, why am I getting in touch with my federation? What am I doing there? So that's a bit difficult to see what your role can be when you're not an athlete anymore, not an athlete's representative anymore.
Yes, that seems quite challenging. I also wonder if, in terms of the things that you've learned in mental training, like you had the action type and you also had the insights, could that knowledge be translated and transferred into this transition? Were you able to, would you see the connections there?
I think so, yes. I think so, especially if you look at insights, for example, because that's something also you can perform or use in your work or in your daily life. So you know what kind of person you are, what your triggers are, and if you are in a negative situation, how do you respond to that? So yes, you can use that a lot, because I think the mental training we had during my career were very useful in that way as well. So I can see, like in my work as well, I see that I am a person who is extrovert and likes to take stuff on and be enthusiastic about things, but I also know what my triggers are when I'm in a stressful situation and how I can deal with that. So that's also something I noticed when I was in my sort of a mental breakdown this summer, that I noticed myself from, it's very strange that I don't want to look at Paralympic Games, and I don't want to know what my former Paralympic athletes or sitting volleyball players are doing, how they are performing. So it's kind of the opposite of what person I was before that, or before I'm out of the stress situation. So that sort of triggered me for how I had to deal with that, and just make sure to get in touch again with people, and to get in touch with sitting volleyball, and make sure that was part of my life again, because that's the way for me to get out of a stressful situation. Go back to your own preferences.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for indicating that. I sense we get some commonalities between what's been spoken from Greg about the integrity and the trust as well aspect of things. So I wonder if we're ready to jump into a panel discussion already, or whether there's one more question which you may feel like you might be able to answer yourself. And that is in relation to when you are, I've forgotten my train of thought now, apologies. When you are moving to look at the mental health aspects, oh, there's so many things at the moment. I'm apologies. I'm actually, I've gone blank because there's so many different sources. If I can thank you at the moment, I'm sure it will come up in the panel discussion. So that's okay. I would welcome everybody else to come, the panelists to come onto the screens, and just to let people know that people can type in their chats for written questions, or raise their hand if they would like to ask a question verbally. It's easier for them to ask the questions. So we have all three presenters here ready to ask and answer some questions. But perhaps I could open it up to the panelists themselves if they have questions that they would want to ask each other first of all. Because I do have a handful of these questions already.
Hey, I guess I'll speak up really quick. And I wish I had said it earlier, but it did. Like, one of the questions was like, how do I learn, everything like that. And this is something that I recommend for anybody. I'm not talking just athletes here, but I see a mental health coach or a counselor, and I've been seeing them roughly every 2 to 3 weeks for the last 8 years. And I think that right there is a huge thing for me to continue to practice my level of mindfulness, because I'm constantly looking at myself. I'm not in a place where I'm, oh, what does this mean? How does that happen? And then not have anyone or any safe place to actually bounce that thought or idea off of. Counselors, empowerment coaches, psychologists, psychiatrists, it's like they're there so you can give to yourself, right? Showing up to see a counselor is not because you have to show up to see a counselor. It's you showing up for an hour of your day, of your week, to speak about how you are feeling. That's the whole purpose of it. And so when they're asking me what tools or stuff, like, how do I practice this? It's because I constantly show up for myself, right? When Debbie was talking about, when we were doing our mindfulness, taking that like 2 minutes, 5 minutes just to be there, that is an opportunity to give to yourself. That's how you explore yourself. That's how you understand how you are feeling, right? I highly encourage, I'm sure you can tell in my voice, I'm very passionate about this, to go and speak with someone. And the best part is, don't go to speak to them when something's wrong. Go to speak to them so you can learn more about yourself, so that if things do go wrong, you already have the tools, the information and the understanding of yourself to learn and move through yourself through that situation. And then next thing you know, you're talking to your counselor again. So I wanted to throw that those tidbits in, because having my coach there, my empowerment coach, no question to me is why I'm able to keep a constant mindset of having fun and enjoying life and everything like that, because I have that opportunity to talk about myself.
Yeah. Debbie, I see you are nodding quite much. You have something?
Yes,
Yes, continue,
thank
please.
you. Thank you. I want to just thank Greg and Elvira for their fabulous presentations and their contribution to this mental health conversation. Thank you very much. I want to pick up on Greg's comment about taking the time to see a counselor or a life coach or a psychologist. And I want to echo what he's saying, and I'm adding that it is the best gift you can give yourself. You don't have to wait for the things to happen, the misfortunes to happen. Do it now. It is just builds you as a person. And the other thing I want to comment on from Greg's presentation is he spoke about vulnerability. And you know that vulnerability is the basis on which we build trust. So when you're building a team, you as individuals have to be able to be vulnerable with each other. Because when we build trust and authentic relationships, we feel safe within that team. We feel safe to express ourselves, to be able to say, oh no, I disagree, because we won't be ostracized. So it's the vulnerability that's important for the trust, that's important for the authenticity, that helps you take the team to meet your goal as a team. So yes, you have your individual goals, but ultimately it's the goal for the team, but it starts on that basis. So thank you for that. I think that is absolutely vital. And the other point I really liked is that without conflict, there's no growth. And I touched on that. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to miss the ball, because from that mistake, you do your most learning. If you didn't make the mistake, you wouldn't grow. It's vital that you make mistakes. So just keeping that in one's mind. And then I want to pick up on Elvira, post your career. I mean, if you think about it, all the losses and the stresses at the same time, that was a heap of stuff to deal with. And I think when we're in it, we actually don't see the wood for the trees. So well done to you on actually recognizing I need to do something about this. And then touching on the, I saw a question in the chat box around when one wants to retire. It's talking about retirement should start when you start the game, because it starts on who you are as a person. And we're back to the same thing. What are your values? What is it that you want for you? And what purpose does this game or this sport serve in your life? And it's only one aspect of your life. That makes it easier to have those conversations about leaving in the future. So really starting right in the beginning, and then just getting a sense of what is it, how am I growing? So coach is not just looking at the sport aspect, but who you are as a person, and linking you. And I really like what Elvira has done in that she was involved with the athletes committee. We met when she was involved with the IPC athletes council. All of that is important, and we should make as leaders in sport opportunities for athletes to be on working groups, to link up with commissions and committees, to get them involved, because hell, they know a lot. This thing that administrators are here, coaches there, and athletes know nothing, that's nonsense. Athletes have a lot to offer any sport. Take their advice, get them involved, because they're the energy in the room. So we need to be having that greater involvement. But I mean, obviously some athletes don't want to do that. But where athletes do, let's help them. And if they don't, let's find another path for them. Thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you, Debbie. That was really important words to hear as well about the athlete's voice. And I think at this point, there was a question about this, about the potentially, I'm rephrasing what was asked in a way that potentially athletes being shy to open up and to discuss some mental health related issues, or even to where to, even though what, if I'm trying to reinforce what Greg is saying is just to take that first step to see someone, and what Debbie says is, you know, to even for yourself as a gift to go to see someone, but seeing someone and then to speak, it's quite a bold, could be quite a bold step. So how do you try to get athletes to do that? And in a team environment, is it a safe space with your other teammates where there might be camaraderie around, or if there's a bit of banter with different teams or something? What sort of ways could athletes begin this process?
Do any of you want to? Otherwise, but perhaps you should say, and then I might add something.
Well, I think it's important, if you want to, like I discussed, that it has to be a part of your full-time program. And yes, it's a gift to yourself as an athlete. So like I said, you have a responsibility for that for yourself. But it's also very important as a coach and a staff in a team sports that they see it as a full, in a how do you say, the subject in a full-time program. Because it's just the same as weight training and practice on court and technical training. It is just a part of your daily program. And I think it's important that coaches and staff members and also federations see that it's such an important issue, and also just a normal thing to do in your program, so that it opens up more for athletes and the team players that they use it. Because we had coaches in the past as a team, they were just, when you were nervous or stressed out before a match, they would laugh. We had coaches in the past who were such not developed in that way, but if your coaches are supporting that and they are organizing it, I think that helps athletes as well, for making sure that it's a normal thing to work on your mind, just as you work on your body and on your practice and your techniques.
See, Greg is nodding, and also we have one person who would like to ask a question. So I don't know what it's going to be, but if we could just unmute this person. Hello, you're welcome. Yes.
Thank you very much, Kok. Okay, I am Sujarwo from Indonesia. Thank you very much for the chance to question verbally. If I, as a coach, and I have players like Greg and also Elvira, with have the mindfulness, so it is easy for me to do my job as a coach. But how you, both of you, doing the trust for your teammates, how you suggest your teammate that they must have the trust to the coaches. What do you think about that? And also it may be a question for Debbie, and how we build the trust to our teams as a coach, actually. Thank you very much.
Okay. You want to go, Greg, and then I'll go?
I think it's important, just because I was close to being retired this year, but also like looking at like the whole Athletics Canada as a team. And I think there's one really important thing, especially as a coach. And it's going to be a challenge, but we always, as a coach, we always want the best for our athletes. But it's important to take note that if our athlete doesn't want to do it, that you still support that. You know, you can still provide them with the information. You can still support them with like documentation, context, everything that. But it's not up to you to tell them to do it. It's up to them to make that decision. And I think that's one thing that in a mental health side of things that people don't quite understand yet, is that we have to want to take part in this. We're going to have to want to, hey, I don't see things working out with me right now. I want to see change. We can do the best we can to support them, to, again, have all the information and all that directed towards them. But the more we actually push people to do things, the more defensive we get in the lack thereof, or the lack of willing to actually take part in it. So that's one of them. But the other way too, I think, coming from a coach's point of view, is leading by example. So if you want your athletes to go and seek professional help and you're not doing it yourself, perhaps that needs to be a discussion you need to have with yourself first, before acting and asking your staff to do that, or your athletes to do the same thing. Lead by example. I always have this saying, you know, I share this with everybody all the time. I have my cell phone here, okay? If you were sitting across the room from me and I wanted to say, here, take my cell phone, you could take it from me because I have it on me. I don't have my cell phone in my hand and I say to you, here, take my cell phone. Well, you can't take it because I don't possess it. So then what I mean by that is, if I'm not showing love for myself, if I'm not seeking help, if I'm not in a place to be able to support others, what am I actually giving them? And so lead by example by, hey, I really want you to, seek some professional help, but hey, just so you know, I've been seeing mine for a while and I found these tools would be really helpful. If you're ever interested, here's a contact, reach out. So those are my 2 points on it.
Thank you, Greg. And Debbie, you wanted to answer?
I want to echo, I was going to say exactly what Greg said about if you want to build trust in a team, as the coach, you have to lead by example. If we're not doing it, so if I'm not practicing mindfulness, I cannot teach it. I have to do it myself, because it's not in what I say. And that is why I gave you that little practice. It's what we do. And that's how we show the direction to our athletes. And it's to do it in a kind, compassionate, non-judgmental way. So it's how do we take that to the athletes? And then the other point I wanted to make is that, you know, here in World Para Volley, you have athletes like Elvira and Greg. And I really want to encourage you to call on them, because this is where other athletes are going to learn. From athletes like Greg and Elvira, to have just those conversations. But even if you have athletes like them in the team, it's because of who they are and that they trust themselves and that they're okay to be vulnerable. They will bring that into the space, and other athletes will learn from that. They're not afraid to take risks. And that's the difference. They are not afraid to take risks, to be vulnerable.
Thank you. And Elvira? Yeah, but
I just wanted to add that, yes, it's also important that coaches make sure that they have the trust of the team, but also for team members, it's important there's trust among them. So if you have to show up. So if you are in a team and you are an athlete and your coach provides the information and provides the possibility to work on your mental health, then it's also really important to see that as an athlete and to make sure that you show up in your team, because vulnerability, you can also share that with your team members, and that makes you perform on court in the end. So I think that's also an important thing to add, that the athletes themselves, the responsibility for them, you have to make sure as a coach that you sort of speak to that as well, for the responsibility you have with your team and for yourself.
I think that's
And as part of,
go ahead, please.
As part of the team structure, coaches need to be mindful of being open to new learning themselves. Yeah. You can learn so much from the athletes. It's not a one top-down approach. It's a top-down, bottom-up, sideways. Everyone learns from everybody else.
That's so true.
Be open to that.
Absolutely, and this is one of the reasons why we're having this webinar. And if I can bring us back to this webinar and the series, as we're at the end of time, we do have still more questions, but I suppose if I can share them with the panelists, and then maybe we can respond back to the individuals who wrote the questions. For the time being, I'd like to thank all the presenters here. I'd like to thank the World Power Volley organisers, the back team who's helped to monitor and deal with the registration and handle the chat messages. I'd also like to hope that everybody had a positive experience from this and would be happy to attend the next one that we have planned. And the topic on this is mental performance on and around the court, from knowledge to practice. We have another 3 excellent speakers to share some of their knowledge, including players, coaches, and people who work in mental performance. Watch this space. Go to the World Power Volley website to find the exact date in June, and also follow this information on social media. If you did enjoy this, do share this information with your colleagues, whether they're part of the World Power Volley community or whether they're into power sports, because I think it's all about the learning and sharing amongst everybody. So without taking up any more time, I'd like to once again thank everybody for their attention, and I'm really, really happy that that you are all here to share this moment with me. Thank you very much.